They say that the Everglades is a place where the water walks on its feet, thin as glass, and the wind learns to whisper secrets in the scrub of dwarf palms and razor grass. That morning, the whisper seemed to come from below, from the black canals that cut through the plain like veins, while the airboat's engine coughed an irregular growl behind us, saturated with the smell of old gasoline and rotting reed. Paul held the portable spotlight close to his chest, like an extra heart, and swept the shore with a narrow beam that made the raccoon's eyes burst in amber and the alligators light up in rubies, 2 by 2, motionless, like stopped hands on a clock with no hours. Their time does not run. It sinks, and every step has the weight of a wrong decision. When I stepped out of the hull, the water rose slowly to my knees, and a muddy cold bit my skin, the kind of cold that doesn't pass, as if something from the swamp had touched me inside and decided to stay. We were following tracks in the mud, wide parallel grooves, alternated with smooth patches where the dragged body had smoothed the ground. Paul crouched, stuck 2 fingers in the trace, and smelled. "Fresh," he said, showing the blade of mud as if it were freshly spilled blood. I learned there that silence also has a smell, and that night it smelled of old paint and damp metal, the odor of bird droppings mixed with something sweet, rotten, coming from a nest we couldn't see. 2 hours before, we had crossed a shallow canal and saw white feathers floating in small constellations, as if someone had torn the sky and scattered it in the swamp. Paul said, "Heron," without looking, and I don't know why the word kept banging against my teeth, heron, as if naming it were the same as burying it. The flashlight swept, and I thought about what had brought me there: curiosity, recklessness, maybe a foolish faith that fear can be tamed when you hold the handle of a strong light, until the beam found the first thing I didn't want to see: a bend in the grass that was too much grass to be wind. I swallowed hard and felt the gasoline burn my nose. It wasn't anything yet, just a denser shadow, a difference in texture in the green mass. The sound came first, something dragging slowly, the water carving a path with the patience of a dull knife. Paul lowered the spotlight, pointed it at my feet, and I saw the bubbles bursting like small silent mouths, a trail of air rising from the bottom to the film. "She's breathing," he whispered. And for a second the phrase made no sense, until I realized that the entire swamp seemed to pull and release air with the same rhythm as my chest. The reeds moved 3 feet ahead, and then the world became only line and curve, an olive-brown thickness, drawn in wide scales like old coins, emerging without hurry. First an arch, then 2, then a succession that got lost behind the dwarf palm, like a necklace someone spilled into the water. "Burmese python," Paul said, and the name slid like the very thing. I knew from articles and photos that they grow to 5-6 meters there, invaders, eating everything that hasn't learned to fear them. Knowing isn't seeing, and seeing is a kind of death of what you were before. The beam of light swept across the body and stopped at a wider area where the skin seemed stretched too thin, the geometry of the spots distorted from within. Paul murmured, "Ate yesterday," and in that swollen bend, there was the shadow of folded legs that could have belonged to a deer or a lost dog, and I felt the weight of a whole animal between us, even though it was absent. The swamp closed in a circle of fine sounds: the ticking of insects, the occasional plop of fish, a dry snap, maybe a branch, maybe teeth, and the blood in my ears creating a private sea where the waves always returned to the same point. The head didn't appear immediately. First, we saw the water lower a finger, as if someone had taken a sip from the canal. Then a black gap broke through the film, oval and low, and from the gap came a blunt snout, the eyes fixed on the ceiling of the world, cold and old like glass beads. It was a predator's architecture that didn't need to justify itself to anyone. The forked tongue marked the air twice, like quotation marks in a sentence that had yet to be said. And then the head followed the body, rising to the grass, slipping, attentive without haste. Paul took a step back, and I stayed still, because every step back has a delay, and mine was stuck somewhere between my spine and my will. "Don't get closer than 2 meters, he said, and I knew that in some manual, from some environmental agency, it was written in letters large enough for fear to read them even in the dark. But the distance there was a wet idea, floating, as imprecise as the reflection of the sky in the water. The spotlight hit the python's eye directly, and for a moment I saw my point of light swallowed by that amber grain, a tiny star borne inward. It's possible to feel when a big creature decides something about us, and what I felt was a subtle adjustment, as if the world had clicked a gear and suddenly I was on the wrong side of the machine. "She's not aggressive," Paul added, "but if cornered, she attacks." The words came with the same caution as holding a cracked vase, and as he said it, the grass hit my left leg, first lightly, then with the weight of a damp rod. Her body, not her head. She was measuring me by touch like a blind person learns a face. My heart struck my ribs with the force of a fist 3, 4, 5 times, and the sound came out of my mouth like steam, white, useless, and I had the foolish certainty that if I didn't breathe, she would stop too, as if we could freeze the world by tacit agreement. The airboat behind us cracked when the hull hit the trunk, and the metallic sound ran down the canal like a line of fire. The python interrupted its movement and curved, pulling a ring of its body under itself. Paul lowered the spotlight to the water and said my name 2 syllables that, there, sounded like a verdict, and told me to slowly climb back into the hull without turning my back, as if returning a secret to its owner. I took the first step and felt the water suck my ankle, a cold hand holding just for whim. Her head advanced an inch, then another, without haste, just enough for me to understand the math. The distance was shrinking, and there was no more ground to negotiate. The cicadas all started again at once, a curtain of needles stitching the air. I lifted my foot, lost my balance, and fell with my knee into the mud, and the night filled with the sweet, animal smell of my own blood, little but too alive. The light trembled and danced on the grass, and the beam traced the python's mouth opening in a gesture that wasn't a threat nor a yawn, just the explanation of the world according to her. I saw clearly the row of recurved teeth, small and many, like clips, and the pale flesh inside, elastic, ready for an old job. I thought, with a calm that wasn't mine, that the true danger is silent and patient, and that we are too noisy to understand. Paul shouted back, and at the same time something heavy ran up my calf, like a living rope trying to remind my bone of the shape of a branch. The pressure didn't hurt, it scared, because it came without warning, without dramatization, just a decision that had been made before I got there. Canal breathed once more, a deep sigh that sank everything half an inch, and I saw, as if watching a movie about myself, the possible scene, the turn, the tangle, the water above, the light spinning in a useless circle. It was then that Paul did something I would never forget. He turned off the spotlight. The dark fell whole, solid, and all the eyes of the swamp closed at the same time. In the space the light left, a new sound was born, the thud of something hard on the water's surface, repeated, rhythmic, as if marking time. I heard the short metallic squeals of the airboat's braces and understood that he was digging up the noise, creating a larger, more convincing presence, so that for a second I would be just another shadow. I felt the pressure ease, a touch that gave up, and took advantage of the world's mistake. I took 2 steps back, 3. The hull scraped my shin, and I climbed first with my hands, then my knees, my chest, as if I were learning to be born again. The air cut in, burned like it was made of very fine needles, and when Paul turned the spotlight back on, the water was clear of snakes, or it seemed to be, because the Everglades keeps things inches away from us, yet far enough to make them seem like rumors. The silence that came after the light was a kind of lie. It seemed calm, but it creaked inside, and every fiber of the swamp vibrated as if it had been touched by invisible fingers that knew exactly where it hurt the most. Paul kept the spotlight low, sweeping the water's surface just enough to reveal circles opening and closing, as if someone were blowing from below, and I understood that everything there has a mouth, everything bites, even if silently and little by little. My knee throbbed with a stubborn pulse, and a thread of blood drew a crooked line toward the edge, disappearing into the water with the speed of a secret learned by a stranger. I had the irrational feeling of warning the swamp that I existed, and that even my scent had a name. Paul didn't talk much, but when he did, his words came from the right place, concise, useful like tools. "She didn't leave," he said, without taking the beam off the water. "She just pulled back, stayed underneath. We've become part of her map now." The idea of being mapped by something that doesn't understand maps made me nauseous. I imagined my leg as a coordinate, the boat as a reference point, and we 2 marks on a map that no one but her would read. The airboat's engine coughed on the first pull and died. On the second, it ignited with a growl that seemed to try to please the wrong god. Paul turned the hull out of the narrow canal toward a corridor of lower grasses, but didn't advance. He let the water push us, slow, like a bad dream that insists on repeating the same scene. "Have you ever seen a deer's mouth disappear like a cork?" he asked, and I answered with a head movement that meant nothing. The grass softened, and we saw a shallow clearing where dead trees thrust white fingers into the sky, as if begging for an answer. In the middle, a tuft of brown feathers floated, and nearby the light foam of something that had struggled until the water no longer helped anyone. "They open slowly," he continued. "Patrol as if they're distracted. When they grab, they don't let go. You can't pull them back without tearing. They've taken dogs, they've taken cats, they've taken what they don't talk about to avoid hurting anyone else." And the way he said "what they don't talk about" kept spinning like a propeller inside my chest. There was a cruel pedagogy in all of that. It was as if the place was willing to teach, as long as it came at the right cost, and the price was always pieces of someone, material or invisible. We passed by an island of cypress trees, thick knees rising from the water, elbows from the earth pointing upward. On one of them, a loop of rope curled like a poorly tied knot. "Trapper," Paul said, spitting the R as if he were spitting something bad from his mouth. He explained that people came at night to leave metal traps for alligators or wild pigs, and sometimes the loop would catch what it shouldn't. And then the swamp would return it slowly, piece by piece. The air grew denser, smelling of old egg and crushed fish, and the spotlight reached a fallen tree with a hollow trunk. Inside the hole, a pair of round eyes, fixed, raccoon or something that learned to wear that mask for convenience. It blinked, ignored us, and disappeared inside as if it had closed a door. When everything normalizes too quickly, I learned that night it's because something bigger is pretending not to be nearby. The mosquitoes organized into clouds and began a methodical attack, as if my skin were newly discovered territory. I tried to wave them away with my hand and spread blood along, drawing a map I didn't want to read. Paul handed me a spray that burned like liquid fire, and the chemical smell added to the night's catalogue with the weight of a signature. "Don't just look at the water," he warned. "Look at the grass. They rise quietly, stay there a little raised, waiting for fatigue or a mistake." And the word "mistake" gained form, sitting next to us like a third passenger. Since childhood, I've always believed that fear was something that happened from the outside in. That night I learned the opposite. It was something that came from within me and borrowed the world, using the swamp as a mirror. The clearing ahead looked like a stage set for a ritual whose rules we didn't know. Trunks aligned like benches, the water mirrored in the center. When the spotlight passed, a circle of small waves opened on its own, without wind, without apparent weight. Paul cut the motor and raised his hand, asking for silence. Even the frogs obeyed. The spotlight stopped on a patch of flattened, dry grass, where the water seemed to have receded hours ago. There in the center, wide, concentric curves were printed, like layers of a living onion. "Sunspot," he said. "They come to warm up. If there's sun tomorrow, she'll come back." And the idea of routine in that creature hit me with unbearable intimacy. "How many meters, do you think?" I asked finally, my voice low as if the sound were a stone that could sink it back down. "More than 5, easily," he replied. "I saw one with 6.5 in the county last year. It took out a whole deer. They only found the carcass later in the reflux." The word reflux came with an image of the sea and vomit, and I wanted to spit something I didn't have. It was then that we heard the rustle in the grass, not far, not close, a calculated distance, like someone slamming a door in the next room just to let you know someone's there. The water made a path, and in that path, the light danced for a second, showing a drawing the eyes would learn forever. The curve and countercurve of a body that doesn't know angles, a writing without letters repeating the same endless syllable. "No heroes today," said Paul, and slowly pushed the hull, the propeller biting just enough to get us out of the position where we'd already been measured. I felt a strange gratitude for that man who knew fear the right way, without denying it or kneeling. The clearing was left behind and the trees began to close in, a cloak of shadows draped over us. The lantern now seemed like a candle at the bottom of a church where the saint had gone away. The waterway led into a larger canal, where the current created a low, constant sound, almost a song without a melody. Paul pointed the light to the left bank, the wet wood of an old dock sunken halfway, and said that we'd leave on foot to take a shortcut to the car. avoiding the long curve of the tide and the chance of another encounter. I didn't like the on foot, but the swamp had decided for us. We docked carefully, tied the boat to a log with a knot that said hurry, and climbed onto soft planks, each step a test of trust in what seemed like soaked bread. When the wood gave under my weight, I saw the water rise between the planks like thin, curious fingers searching for a pulse. The pine forest just ahead promised solid ground, promises there were always written in sand. The trail was narrow, fine sand mixed with leaves that cracked under the boots, and in some places roots ran like thick nerves under the earth's skin. The smell changed, less rotten, more resin and clean earth, a relief that lasted the time of a breath. That's when we found the first fresh droppings, cylindrical with short hairs and fragments of hooves. Paul leaned over, touched them with a branch, nodded without joy. Wild pig. The sound of something heavy made the underbrush shake to the right, and two pairs of eyes flared in an explosion of leaves. It wasn't what we feared, but the body reacted as if it were. My knee complained, and a hot sting rose to my groin, reminding me I was made of flesh and decisions. Paul kept leading, and I kept counting the steps like someone praying. At 53, the swamp's clock struck. A snap, then two, then the silence that decides. The smell came first. Not of a creature, of old water, that same sweet sourness I had felt in the canal. And then the grass beside us moved from the bottom up, a sheet shaken by enormous hands. The lantern drew the head, and three more curves rising with it, and the impression was that the entire forest had turned into one long, patient, hungry thing. "Don't run," Paul said, and the order seemed absurd because everything in me was already running, the blood, the thoughts, the future. But I obeyed, because there comes a time when you learn that running is offering your own body as an option. The ground under the boots lost its friction, and for a second the trail became a treadmill moving against us. The python's head lifted an inch off the ground, eyes level with my knee, and the tongue traced the air twice. Another comma, as if writing the sentence where my name fit. Paul raised his arm with something I hadn't seen, a long aluminum hook with a curve at the end, and lightly touched the side of the animal, a touch that said, "I see you," without saying, "I challenge you." The python altered its line, changed direction like water choosing another bank, but the tail, that one, whipped low and hit my wounded shin with ancient precision, reopening the cut, a gate. The pain was a white, dry flash. I lost my breath and in the emptiness heard a memory I didn't know was mine. My father's voice saying that the big things of the world don't hurry because they've already conquered time. The light flickered, drawing tree shadows on the snake's body like moving tattoos. Paul, without taking his eyes off her, spoke quietly. 5 more steps slowly, when I say. And at that moment, I realized we weren't leaving, just negotiating a temporary surrender. Completing 5 steps required a faith I didn't have, so I created one. That the night would end and there would be sun, and that the sunspot would be hers, not mine, and that, for that very reason, she would let us go, because the swamp has its own economy, and sometimes it's generous for pure calculation. "Now," Paul said, and we went sideways without crossing in front of her, offering shoulders instead of chests, looking at the ground, at our own feet like penitents. The tongue traced the air a 3rd time, a period, and with that period, the forest exhaled the air it had been holding since before we arrived. When we reached the dirt road, a pale ribbon running between the pines, the noise of the human world returned all at once. A distant plane, an invisible truck, things that suddenly were as beautiful as old songs. The dirt road seemed like a straight promise in a world of curves, but I learned quickly that promises, in deep Florida, come with fine print that no one reads at night. The moon was a coin split by clouds, and the pines cast long shadows that crossed the road like bars, each stripe a test of passage for bodies too tired to believe in luck. The smell changed again, swapping sweet mud for hot dust and resin, and the sound of the swamp was left behind like a conversation that continues in a low voice, just to make sure we don't forget who's in charge when the water decides to rise. My knee burned under the soaked fabric, pulsing beneath the sock like a mouth, and with each step I left a darker spot in the dust, an organic Morse code saying things I didn't want to teach the swamp. Paul suggested tightening the bandage with tape from the kit, and the compression brought brief relief as if the pain accepted to negotiate for a few minutes. 1/2 an hour to the car, he calculated, and the voice came with the same economy from the start of the night. Only now, something scraped inside it, like splinters in the throat. The air blew from the south, hot, and brought back a thread of the swamp, that sweet, sour smell that signals bad things without explaining which. Somewhere to the left, a wild pig cut through the woods in blind flight, bursting dry leaves and throwing an old oof, the sound of pain kept in basements where no one visits. The sand trail widened, and for a stretch, walking became easier, almost allowing us to pretend the night had only been an exaggeration of sensations. Paul, however, didn't let go. His eyes scanned the tall grass on the edge, his body sideways like someone apologizing for being in the world, and the hook handle traced a slow, measured rhythm, as if speaking the language of big creatures with nothing but gesture. The first footprint appeared in silence, like essential things do. Two soft parallel lines broken by a wide arch, the mark of a heavy body passing slowly, imprinting a design on dust that hadn't yet given up being dust. I would have passed by without seeing, but Paul stopped, leaned the beam of the lantern sideways, licking the texture, and the relief jumped as if it had learned to bite light. He didn't say anything, just traced the path with his finger, the way in and out of the brush, and I knew that wasn't recent memory. Further ahead, two more, clearer like echoes, the invisible arrows pointed backward, toward the swamp, and the idea pierced me entirely. The path we had made was now drawn beneath ours like a twin road, wet and patient. "She uses both banks," he murmured, "water and land. If the water fails, she chooses the dust, and if the dust talks too much, she goes back to the water." And I thought of lines of desire, lines of escape, all born from a lowered head with eyes that look at the sky out of habit. The night tightened again. The wind stopped completely, and the mosquitoes returned to tradeskin as if my sweat were a new currency in circulation. The spray burned and, for a few seconds, disguised the taste of metal in my mouth, but the rotten sweetness coming from behind respected nothing, creeping in through the cracks like old water. "Don't run the lights when we leave the woods," Paul said. "Cars in the county confuse big snakes on the road with recapped tires and stop to mess with them." The phrase came dry, clipped, rehearsed by someone who's tired of stopping bad endings on short roads. Once I remembered reading about people who measure creatures by skin, not bone, and I understood why stories in the South always come out bigger than they went in. It's because here, everything has an elastic margin, even the truth. The first sign appeared crooked, bitten by rust. "Area closed after dark. Everglades Conservation Unit." The lantern lit up the rust as if it were old blood, and the edge of the sign had fine diagonal marks, scratches from a raccoon or from someone without gloves trying the screw in a hurry. I thought about how the night collects activities the day wouldn't understand. The sound came before the sight, a deep buzzing that wasn't an insect. A distant growl that rose, fell, moved away, and came back. The lights came after, two yellow dots swaying behind pines, and the pale line of the road took shape when the headlights swept the sand. Paul raised his hand in an automatic gesture, and the truck, an old pickup light-colored metal, responded with a short honk, 2 taps, the conversation of people who go where maps don't reach. "It's Mike," Paul said without any relief in his voice, as if even good news had imposed that night a toll of caution. The pickup stopped with its wheels on the gravel, and the smell of a hot engine and old fabric took the place of the swamp for a few seconds. Mike got out, already talking, thick accent that chewed the R's and hit the T's, asking about the radio that didn't pick up, the blocked channel, the power outage in the county that had even turned off the lights on Route 41. The night, it seems, had decided to be bigger than the sum of our fears. He pointed the beam at my knee, whistled low, and opened the toolbox like he was opening an altar. He cleaned the cut with saline and alcohol, liquid fire, placed strips of mesh over the skin, and sealed it with tape that glowed under the light like new skin. "It'll hold," he said, "as long as you hold your head in place," and I understood that the head was the most fragile place of the night. We got into the truck, Paul and I in front, Mike in the back with the toolbox and the hook, the bed thumping like a heart on a rough road. The wheels bit the sand, spat dust, and for a stretch, the world accepted the fiction that distance resolves things. The pines gave way to open fields of tall grass. Spaced signs announced drainage, canals, levees with numbers that seemed like chapels without saints. The radio picked up static, fragmented voices saying, "Storm out, line down." And each break seemed like another missing tooth in the county's mouth. Mike tapped on the side of the truck bed, 2 taps when something moved on the edge, 1 tap when nothing. And I started translating that code into... It was when the road decided to test our faith. On the gentle curve to the right, between 2 strips of serrated grass, Mike's lantern found a mass lying across half the road, dull, without reflection, a denser shadow in the dark. Paul braked in a gesture that was more calculation than fright, the truck groaning as if apologizing to time, and we stopped 3 meters from the thing. The car's headlights washed over the body, and the texture returned a dirty olive color with irregular dark patches. The head, invisible, but the tail, yes, drawn in an arc. The last third of the animal resting on the gravel like a heavy cable, its tip lost in the grass. An invitation. "Don't get out," Mike warned, his voice dry, not matching his curious eyes. But Paul was already opening the door slowly, the hook in hand, and I hated that courage. At that moment, seemed like the desire not to make fear a subject for tomorrow. "She does this," Paul said. "Stays in the stillness of the asphalt, catches heat, becomes a false bump. People stop, rest their feet, enjoy the danger. Sometimes it works, sometimes it makes the news. The night chooses." And the final phrase made me want to laugh at the wrong point, which is probably one of the ways the body understands it's alive. The air was still, heavy, and the rotten sweetness returned with force, as if someone had opened the lid of a jar near our faces. Paul moved closer, sideways. The hook extended, touched the last third of the body with minimal pressure, not to poke, but to communicate presence. The mass responded with a shift that didn't fit in the eye's time. Lying down, it turned into a raised line, and the tail scratched the gravel like a low saber, striking invisible sparks that I heard but didn't see. The head appeared from the grass, low, firm, the tongue cutting the air once, twice, 3 times, and I understood that the invitation was indeed an open door, not for us, for her. The door through which she retreats and attacks with the same fluidity, because what measures the world in smell and heat doesn't get delayed by human surprises. Mike, from the back, carried the flashlight and opened another angle of light, and the overlap made the animal's skin look like it was made of dirty coins stuck together one by one. Paul spoke without taking his eyes off it. "Go in. Reverse. Slowly. If she picks the axis, we lose the drive shaft. If she picks the shadow, we're lucky." And I, for the first time, prayed not to understand, but to make it happen. I got in, shifted, the pedal trembled under my sole, and the truck moved back 1 inch, 2, 3. The head followed, the tail too, and for a fraction, we were 3 points in the same rhythm, like dancers obeying a song none of us played, and that's when everything gave way. On the opposite side, in the left grass, another shadow opened a path, smaller, faster, a juvenile body, 2 maybe, and the math changed. It wasn't just 1, it was a story with plural, and suddenly, the dusty asphalt was a maternity ward, a passageway, a place of their world, and we were a calendar mistake. Mike shouted a short warning I didn't understand. Paul raised the hook away from the bigger head, and the tail hit the bumper with the sound of old iron. The engine sputtered as if it had swallowed water. The lights flickered, and in a night where everything breathed with measure, the car's breath failed as if it too decided to hide. The following silence was the thickest of all, the kind of silence that doesn't accept words inside. And I discovered that some fears don't tremble. They stay still, heavy, waiting for the world to take the next step. The engine died like a fish out of water, opening and closing its mouth in silence, and the dashboard lights sank into a darkness that seemed to have weight, a blanket thrown by hands that know when to end the party of the living. Outside, the dust settled too quickly, as if the air had also learned to crawl, and the grass to the left drew a narrow corridor through which the smaller shadow advanced, its head swaying low, its tongue marking commas in the world's text. In the mirror, the tail of the larger one rested next to the bumper, so close that I could imagine the vibration of each muscle fiber touching the metal, a conversation that the metal understood, and we did not. Paul didn't blink. The hook was high, his body sideways, his knee bent to accelerate, but his face said something else, that certain retreats don't fit the geometry of a world that here didn't belong to us. Mike moved the flashlight in short arcs, sweeping the front of the grass, and the light seemed to find skins where there had only been green before, 1, 2, 3 juvenile curves moving underneath as if the earth were water. "Nest nearby," he said, as if commenting on the weather. And the word nest, tied to something so boundless, ended any hope that this was mere chance. "The car comes back if it rests," Paul whispered, and his voice sounded like someone speaking to a sick person. "But if the larger one decides on the cabin's shadow, we become part of the road." And the road, here, had its own position and will. "Go slowly by Mike's side," he added. "Keep the door between you and her. If she makes an S, close it and get in the seat." Simple instructions like childhood prayers, thought out by someone who knows the true size of fear. I breathed little, as if the air were a collective resource. I opened the door an inch too. The click of the latch sounded too loud and ricocheted in the grass, and the heads, the smaller one to the left, the larger one ahead, paused, like commas deciding whether they should become periods. I slid out, keeping the door as a hospital shield, my heart beating fast, my body remembering the wounded knee with electric stabs that rose like intimate lightning. Mike was already standing, halfway out of the truck bed, flashlight in hand, and the beam hit the larger one's eye directly, without challenging, without asking. Just saying, "We see you." It's strange to say, but in that second, I understood that seeing, there, was a gesture of respect and survival. If the night chooses, light can sometimes ask for a part. Paul took a measured step, touched with the curve of the hook the half of the body that was on the road, and the touch didn't say, "Leave," it said, "Make space." The python moved a centimeter to an engineering miracle made of ancient muscle. "Now," he said, and I walked around the front of the car, brushing the low beam like someone passing fingers over a wooden saint. The smaller one to the left lifted an inch of ground. Its tongue brushed my wounded calf with air, not with flesh. I felt again the measuring, the ruler with no numbers pressing against me. The sweet and sour smell, the jar's lid open, invaded my mouth and went down my throat like bad syrup. And I saw myself as a child, holding back coughs during a long mass, believing that holding the body was proof of faith. Mike tapped twice on the metal, the code, and the larger one responded with a small adjustment of its tail, drawing a semicircle that opened the road like a curtain. The truck sputtered a thread of life when I turned the key, not faith, friction, and the engine roared to life with the irregular growl of someone waking suddenly. Weak lights flickered back on, and the dashboard blinked a poor constellation that at that moment was worth the whole sky. Paul stepped back 2 paces, the hook still present, and closed the door so slowly that the world didn't notice. Mike climbed in, fell into the truck bed, and made the flashlight dance from side to side, a theater curtain hiding the backstage. I shifted into first, more breath than strength, and let the car roll. The larger one didn't test the bumpers or axles. It slid into the shadow like a decision that had already been made before we were born. We left without any unnecessary accelerations, like someone leaving another person's room while they sleep, not wanting to wake the past. Round the curve, I saw in the rearview mirror the lights lick the olive skin again, and for a moment, the road seemed narrower than before, as if the world had secretly grown. Only when the pines gave way to the gravel strip leading to the dirt parking lot did my body relax its shoulders. The distant sound of US 41 returned, constant, human, and for a few seconds, the invisible trucks sounded like lullabies. We stopped. The radio, which had become static, decided to form words: line restored, County East, caution wildlife crossing. And it was almost comical that the most civilized phrase of the night was also the most obvious. Mike laughed low nervously, like someone returning a borrowed glass. Paul put the hook away, wiped the blade with an old cloth, a gesture of someone closing a ceremony, and I, with the compress stuck to my knee, finally felt the slight fever rise, the white blood cell count beginning its invisible procession. "Don't tell everything tomorrow," Mike said. "The big parts you keep, otherwise folks come in flip-flops to see a bump at night." And the phrase, besides being advice, was a form of rough love from the South. Paul added, "And remember, there are no heroes in the swamp. There are those who leave together slowly and those who decide to stay." And for the first time, I understood that going home was, there, the greatest courage. I slept poorly afterward, a shallow sleep imitating water, where dreams came in curves and went out in tails. I woke up with the sun sticking the curtains to the window, and the light seemed like a temporary forgiveness, a loan from the day, so the bones would accept to move. On the local news, they showed a bad picture of a deer someone had found in the drainage to the east. Only the hooves, a piece of skin, an interrupted sentence, and the comments were a chorus of certainties, recipes, others bravado. I turned it off. I opened the dressing. The skin around the cut was clean, the tape's design like a map of thin streets. There was a long bruise on my calf, half moon-shaped, a tail mark, and looking at it, I felt both pride and shame at the same time. Pride for having gone, shame for having tried to prove something to what didn't need proof. I went back to the Everglades weeks later, of course. No one learns the first time, but with a different grammar. I walked sideways on the trails, looked more at the grass than the water, and learned the gesture of lifting my foot before believing I had ground. I brought a smaller flashlight, an extra piece of tape, a cheaper and more useful faith and a more expensive respect. And when I found another sunspot, dry, perfect, I didn't touch it, didn't photograph it. I let the day do the work of keeping it for me. Since then, the night doesn't always choose against. Sometimes it just waits for us to understand the chapter that's ours. And that morning the chapter was simple. 3 breaths, the swamps, the animals, ours, trying not to disturb each other.